America was a nation on the edge, but the descent into civil war wasn't sudden. It was a slow burn, fueled by decades of simmering tensions. The early 19th century saw America expanding rapidly, but with every new state added, a question loomed. Would it be free or slave? This wasn't just a political debate, it was a battle for the nation's soul. From the Missouri Compromise to the bloody skirmishes in Kansas, the divide grew deeper with each passing year. The voices of abolitionists clashed with the defenders of slavery, and compromise became a distant memory. But how did these tensions evolve from political disagreements into an all-out war? Stay tuned, because what happens next will reveal the moments that push the nation beyond the point of no return. Economic differences between the North and South. Imagine living in a country so divided that one half thrives on factories and innovation, while the other clings to an age-old institution like slavery. That's the stark contrast between the North and South in pre-Civil War America. The North was a powerhouse of industry. As cities grew, so did factories, railroads, and new technologies. This rapid industrialization meant that the North was becoming less dependent on agriculture and more on manufacturing. Northern workers earned wages, and the economy was driven by the production of goods and services. This shift brought about a culture of progress and change, leading many in the North to question the moral and economic validity of slavery. Meanwhile, the South's economy was almost entirely built on agriculture, particularly the cultivation of cash crops like cotton, tobacco, and sugar. This agrarian economy was deeply intertwined with the institution of slavery. Enslaved people were not just laborers, they were a massive economic asset. By 1860, the value of slaves in the South was nearly $3 billion, which was more than the value of all the farmland and buildings combined in the region. This created a society where wealth and power were concentrated in the hands of a few who owned large plantations and the people forced to work them. These economic differences weren't just about money, they shaped the cultures, politics, and worldviews of both regions. In the North, where industry flourished, there was a growing belief in the principles of free labor and capitalism. In contrast, the South was committed to preserving a way of life that depended on slavery. As the North pushed forward with abolitionist ideas and industrial growth, the South dug in its heels, defending slavery as not just an economic necessity, but a way of life. This economic divergence led to political clashes, with the North advocating for policies that would support industrial growth and limit the expansion of slavery, while the South fought to protect its economic interests and the institution of slavery. These tensions reached a boiling point, contributing significantly to the outbreak of the Civil War. The war wasn't just a battle of armies, it was a clash of two fundamentally different economic systems and the ways of life that they supported. Impact of the abolitionist movement. The abolitionist movement wasn't just about ideals. It was a powerful force that shook the very foundations of America in the 19th century. In the North, a wave of passionate individuals rose up against the institution of slavery, their voices echoing across the country. Among them was Frederick Douglass, a former slave who became one of the most powerful orators of his time. His speeches and writings exposed the brutal realities of slavery, drawing countless people to the cause. William Lloyd Garrison was another key figure. He published The Liberator, a fiery abolitionist newspaper that refused to compromise on the demand for immediate emancipation. Garrison's words were unyielding, calling slavery a sin that had to be eradicated, and his influence spread far and wide, stirring both admiration and anger. Then there was Harriet Beecher Stowe, whose novel Uncle Tom's Cabin hit America like a lightning bolt. Published in 1852, the book depicted the horrors of slavery through the eyes of its characters, making the suffering of enslaved people real and personal for readers in the North. Stowe's work did more than just tell a story, it changed minds. Abraham Lincoln supposedly greeted her as the little lady who started this big war, underscoring the profound impact her novel had on public opinion. But it wasn't just the well-known figures who fueled the abolitionist movement. Across the North, smaller groups and societies formed, all dedicated to ending slavery. Abolitionist literature, including newspapers, pamphlets, and books, flooded the streets, reaching into homes and hearts. This literature was more than just words on a page. It was a call to action. It exposed the cruelty of slavery and challenged the moral complacency of those who tolerated it. The impact of this movement went far beyond just raising awareness. It polarized the nation. In the South, the rise of abolitionism was seen as a direct threat to their way of life, increasing the already deepening rift between North and South. In the North, it shifted public opinion, turning more people against the institution of slavery and making it a key political issue. The abolitionist movement didn't just advocate for the end of slavery, it demanded it, fueling the fire that would eventually lead to the Civil War. This was more than a moral crusade. It was a relentless push for justice that forever changed the course of American history. The role of the Compromise of 1850. The Compromise of 1850 was supposed to be a solution, a way to keep the nation from tearing itself apart. But instead, it became another step toward conflict. Imagine the country in 1850 teetering on the edge of a divide. The issue of slavery was like a growing storm, threatening to engulf everything. To try and calm things down, Congress came up with the Compromise of 1850, a series of 5 bills designed to ease the tensions between slave and free states. One of the key pieces of this compromise was the admission of California as a free state. This was a big win for the North because it tipped the balance of power in the Senate in favor of free states. But for the South, it was a bitter pill to swallow. They feared losing influence in a government where decisions could increasingly turn against the institution of slavery. To appease the South, another part of the compromise included the Fugitive Slave Act. This was no ordinary law. It gave the federal government the power to capture and return runaway slaves to their owners, even if they had escaped to free states. It wasn't just about recapturing fugitives. It put the weight of the law behind slavery, making it a national issue. For many in the North, this act was an outrage. It forced them to become complicit in the very system they opposed. Suddenly, even those who weren't abolitionists found themselves in a moral crisis. How could they stand by while their laws supported the capture and return of people who had risked everything for freedom? The Fugitive Slave Act didn't just upset the balance, it deepened the divide, stirring anger and resentment across the North. While the Compromise of 1850 managed to delay the inevitable clash between North and South, it also set the stage for even greater conflict. The country wasn't any more united. In fact, the divisions were only growing deeper. In trying to please both sides, the compromise ended up satisfying neither. The North saw the Fugitive Slave Act as an assault on their values, while the South felt increasingly isolated and defensive as they watched their influence wane. In the end, the Compromise of 1850 was less a solution and more a band-aid on a wound that was already festering. The Kansas-Nebraska Act in Bleeding Kansas. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 was like throwing gasoline on a smoldering fire. It introduced the idea of popular sovereignty, where the people living in the Kansas and Nebraska territories could decide for themselves whether to allow slavery. This sounded like democracy in action, but in reality, it unleashed chaos. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers poured into Kansas, each side determined to sway the vote. Tensions quickly escalated into violence, turning Kansas into a battleground. The territory earned the nickname Bleeding Kansas as skirmishes, raids, and outright massacres became common. This period wasn't just a local conflict, it was a preview of the nationwide bloodshed that would soon follow. The violence in Kansas showed that compromise was no longer possible. The nation was deeply divided, and the clashes in Kansas foreshadowed the brutal conflict that would engulf the entire country in the Civil War. The Dred Scott decision in 1857, the Dred Scott decision shook the nation to its core. Dred Scott was an enslaved man who had lived in free territories, and he believed this should make him a free man. His case reached the Supreme Court, but the ruling was devastating. The court decided that Scott, and by extension all African Americans, were not citizens and had no right to sue in federal court. But the decision didn't stop there. The court also declared that Congress had no power to prohibit slavery in the federal territories, effectively striking down the Missouri Compromise, which had kept a fragile balance between free and slave states for decades. This ruling was a huge victory for the Southern slave power and sent shockwaves through the North. Many Northerners were horrified, seeing this as clear evidence that slavery was being aggressively expanded, with the federal government's blessing. The Dred Scott decision not only deepened the divide between North and South, but also made it clear that the conflict over slavery was spiraling towards an inevitable and bloody clash. If you're finding this story as compelling as we do, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating insights into history's most pivotal moments.